In this lecture, we're going to go over Galileo. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind as we go over this is the conflict that is happening between things that are going on in science and the Catholic Church and officials in the Catholic Church. So, a character before Galileo was Copernicus, and Copernicus was advancing this theory, this idea that not everything is going around Earth. Okay? The idea that everything revolves around Earth is the geocentric theory. Okay, that was the popular theory in play during the time of Galileo and Copernicus. But Copernicus and Galileo are both going to offer an alternative that they are going to say matches what they observe out in the solar system, and that is the heliocentric theory, or a theory that is not the geocentric theory. Okay, the heliocentric theory is where the Earth is going around the sun. The point is that they're going to be making is that geocentric theory is not adequate in order to explain the observations that are taking place. So, as a background to this, there's a lot of philosophy of Aristotle that these professors at the Catholic universities, because that's all there was, is Catholic universities in this time. So these professors at the Catholic universities, they were teachers of philosophy. In particular, they fashioned themselves as teachers of the philosophy of Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas. Okay, but in particular Aristotle. And so we're going to see this conflict that takes place as we go through some of these readings from Galileo. In this letter to Muni, Galileo is going to be talking about these observations that he's made with his telescope, because Galileo makes a telescope. It wasn't the first telescope that was ever made, but it's one that's good enough that he can see what's going on the moon. And so Galileo has made these observations on the moon, and here he is writing about it. He says, "A few days ago, when paying my respects to the illustrious Cardinal Moody, a discussion arose on the inequalities of the moon's surface. Signor Alessandro Capuano argued to disprove the fact of its rough surfaces. He argued that if the lunar surfaces be unequal and mountainous, and since nature has made our earth mountainous for the benefits of plants and animals beneficial to mankind, one may say as a consequence that on the moon there must be other plants and other animals beneficial to other intellectual creatures. Since such consequence is most false, he said, then the fact from which it is drawn must also be false." Here's a conclusion. "Therefore, lunar mountains do not exist." So Galileo was looking at the moon through his telescope, and he noticed that he sees crevices, he sees things that you see on Earth. He sees some mountains. So Galileo is seeing this with the telescope. Okay? And he is arguing, when he is presenting this to people, to these professors at these universities, they're saying, you know what? There can't be these mountains that you're talking about on the moon. The popular theory during this time of Galileo it comes from Aristotle. Aristotle had a theory that all of the planets and all this stuff you see in the sky out there, it is all made of this celestial, this divine substance. Okay, this was from Aristotle. This is one of Aristotle's theories that is actually wrong. Okay, but it's not like Aristotle was proposing these theories as if they were as certain as his other theories. Like when Aristotle's talking about actuality, potentiality, motion, he's laying down the reality of the situation. He is describing reality for us, and he writes with confidence in doing that. But when he's talking about these celestial bodies, it's a different flavor that we're getting from Aristotle. He's not presenting it like he presents his other material. So these people are having a problem with what Galileo is presenting, because they're saying, whoa, you can't be seeing this stuff. The moon and all these stars, they're made of divine material. It can't be the stuff that's here on earth. And of course, Galileo, what is he using to figure this out? He's using his telescope. So he's looking through his telescope, and he sees with his eyes that the moon appears to be made of the same stuff that's on earth. Okay, so in your mind, knowing what you should know about Aristotle, who is following Aristotle more? Aristotle said knowledge begins with sense experience. You could trust your eyes, you could trust your sense experience. Galileo here seems to be more in line with the philosophy of Aristotle than these so-called teachers of Aristotle. And we're going to see that throughout the writings here. So Galileo says, since such a consequence is false, he said, then the fact from it which it is drawn must also be false. Therefore, lunar mountains do not exist. So this person who Galileo is arguing with is saying there can't be mountains on the earth. I mean, on the moon. There can't be this stuff. There can't be lunar surfaces, mountainous, since nature has made our earth mountainous for the benefit of plants and animals. So he's saying, listen, we got mountains here because it has, it's for the benefit of plants and animals. There's no plants and animals on the moon. Therefore, there can't be these mountains. Now, it's hard to see what's going on here, but this person, this Alessandro Capuano, who Galileo is arguing against, he is arguing by way of final cause. Aristotle laid out four causes by which we know things. And perhaps the hardest one to know is the final cause. Okay? Because the final cause is the purpose of the thing. It's easy to know the final cause concerning things that human beings make. Okay? If somebody has a chair, it's easy to figure out the final cause. You could just ask them, hey, why'd you make this? And they say, so we can sit in it. Okay? But is it that easy to find the final cause of the tree, or of an orange, or of a mountain? No, because you can't just go ask the person who made it, right? If you believe in God, you believe God created everything. You just can't ask God and God's going to tell you the scientific answer. Okay, so this person is arguing by way of final cause. He's saying, hey, listen, the purpose of mountains, it's for human beings. So if there's no humans or plants or animals up on the moon, then what the heck you need mountains for? Right? So we see maybe even perhaps a lack of humility on the part of Signor Alessandro Capuano, okay, where he is claiming a knowledge of a final cause as his argument here. Okay, and this is what Galileo has a problem with, because he's like, man, look, I'm looking through the telescope. Now, granted, a telescope, you still are relying on authority, because we have to trust that the telescope is made correctly and you're viewing through a lens. So it's not direct. It's not as direct as you looking at your computer right now. I mean, the physical computer, I mean, that is direct. Okay, that's immediately self-evident stuff going on right there. So when Galileo is looking through his telescope, he still has to rely on the authority of the telescope. But, I mean, it's pretty good. That's a pretty good indication, looking through a telescope and you viewing the moon. That's pretty good evidence right there In other words, a telescope, even though you're relying on some authority, it's giving some pretty accurate information there. Just common sense can figure this out, right? You're looking at the moon, and if it's not too hazy, I mean, you could see what's on it if you're looking through a telescope. And this is what Galileo is saying. It's like, man, you're arguing that there's no mountains based on this, the purpose of mountains, and I'm telling you there's mountains because I see them through the telescope. So which one is following Aristotle more? Oh, it's Galileo. So Galileo is going to have further arguments to say about these same sort of things. In his letter to Costelli, Galileo says, "But it seems to me that I am not bound to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and understanding does not permit us to use them." Okay? Because you have these teachers of philosophy and of theology, they're denying some of the conclusions in the theories of Galileo. And Galileo is saying that I'm not bound to believe that the same God who has endowed us with senses, reason, understanding does not permit us to use them. In other words, if we find something out with our senses and our understanding, I mean, it should not conflict with some other truth going on, right? And desires us to acquaint us in another way, that is, through revelation or religious authority, with such knowledge as we are in position to acquire for ourselves by means of those faculties. And he goes on, "This therefore being granted, I think that in discussing natural phenomena, we ought not to begin with texts from Scripture, but with experiment and demonstration. For from the divine word, both Scripture and nature do alike proceed." And I can see that which experience sets before our eyes concerning natural effects. So you see what's going on here. Galileo is saying, concerning the natural world, that's what he's talking about. This is an important point. Concerning the natural world, we ought not to begin with texts from Scripture. Okay? Listen, this is something that the great philosopher St. Thomas Aquinas also recognized. Before you encounter something like the Bible, the Holy Scriptures, you are bringing into that all of your knowledge from the world, because the Bible has words in it. And before you can read the Bible, you must already know how to read. Well, how did you figure out how to read? You had experiences in the world. So before you read a book in the Bible or get some divine teaching, it's already assumed that you know truths about the world that you found out just by using your human reason. Okay? So, in order to understand properly any book, it is necessary that you've already learned just common sense things, just normal things about the world using your senses and your reasoning. This is what Galileo is saying here. Listen, before we look at the Holy Scriptures, we ought to investigate the world and so that we can understand the Holy Scriptures better. Right? This is what he's saying. I think that in discussing natural phenomena, we ought not to begin with texts from Scripture, but with experiment and demonstration. Okay? So if we find out through looking at the world, through examining and investigation, that there are different kinds of things, right? There's plants, there's animals, human beings, and then we find out through our investigation of the world that human beings are different. Human beings are different from plants because they can reason. Okay, this is stuff that you find out in philosophy, apart from any Holy Scripture. Now, if you know that just from your investigation of the world, that will help you. That helps you understand what is going on in the Holy Scriptures better than if you didn't know that. So, if you didn't know that plants and human beings are different, there's no way that you're going to understand the Bible. If you don't know that point, okay. If you don't know that that when things fall from a high distance, they hit harder than if they just fell from a short distance. Right? These are just common sense things that you would know just going around just in daily life. Right? If somebody drops something and it's only from a short distance, I mean, you're not that scared. But if somebody's dropping it from a 2-story building, you're like, whoa, get out of the way. I mean, you don't need an investigation or some sort of experiment to figure that out. Right? In other words, you're taking that knowledge from the world in when you are reading a book. The book that you're reading is already assuming you know this stuff, right? This normal everyday stuff, right? Galileo is just taking a little further. He's like, hey, if we could find out things through demonstration, through mathematics, through scientific experiment, through this stuff, this is going to help us understand the Bible better, right? So who he's arguing against are people who are using the Bible in order to understand nature. Okay, don't get me wrong. There's things in the Bible. There's some points in the Bible that can perhaps help you do that. Okay, but in general, we can do scientific experiments and we can study the world, the natural world, just using our human reason. And this should allow us to understand the books that we read better. And I said, this is the point that Galileo is making right here. Now, one of Galileo's last points that we're going to go over here is in his writing called The Dialogues of Two Chief Systems. And he says, with this object, I have taken up in the dialogue the Copernican side of the question, treating it as a pure mathematical hypothesis. I try in every artificial manner to represent it as having the advantage, not over the opinion of the stability of the earth absolutely, but over it as taught and defended by some who profess to be peripatetics, that is, followers of Aristotle. So he's saying, listen, I'm arguing against these people who profess to be peripatetics. That's another word where he's referring to followers of Aristotle. That's who he's arguing against. He says who profess, because he doesn't think that they're real followers of Aristotle. Because Aristotle, one of his fundamentals of philosophy in Aristotle is that knowledge begins with sense experience. And your sense experience is reliable. This is what Galileo is saying. Galileo is saying, listen, I'm using my sense experience to figure this stuff out. So he goes on. For they retain only the name peripatetic. In other words, follower of Aristotle. They're only using it as a name. And are content without improvement to worship shadows, not philosophizing with their own reason, but only from the recollection of four principles imperfectly understood. Okay? The four principles he could be referring to are the four causes. So he's saying that these so-called followers of Aristotle, they want to keep worshiping shadows. Okay? They want to keep believing the things that they already have in their mind. They're not open to being corrected. So what is he saying? Like I said before, he's saying these people are just lacking humility to be corrected. I'm showing them that what they're believing is false, but they don't want to change it because they're just human beings. They're no different than professors at universities and colleges that are around today. If I've been teaching something, or another professor at a university has been teaching something for years, and maybe they've written a few books on what they've been teaching, their own theories, and then to find out that it's wrong. I mean, do you think they're going to be quick to say, "Boy, you know what? My whole 30 years I've been teaching this and it's wrong. Oh well, guess I'll just have to study this new thing." Yeah, we're just human beings. You think we're going to do that right away? No, we're going to resist it. We don't want to believe that the past 20, 30 years we've been teaching something has been worthless. All right, so I mean, so it takes a bit of humility to change and to recognize the truth that's coming at you. And this is what Galileo is saying here. He's like, you guys, you're proclaiming to follow Aristotle, but in fact, I'm showing you this stuff, and you just don't want to believe it. All right, and this is, remember, this is Galileo, and we have a turn going on here. It's a major turn. And the reason why this is part of philosophy, you can see it, is Galileo, along with this, there is a discrediting of the reigning philosophy of the time. That is the philosophy of Aristotle. In two ways, this is discrediting Aristotle. First, Aristotle was the one with the theory that the stuff up there is some divine, non-changing material. And Galileo looks up there with the telescope and finds out, nah, it's just like the stuff here on Earth. That's number one. And the second one is that Aristotle is being grouped with these professors who are very close-minded, right? So these people who are claiming to be followers and teachers of Aristotle, which in fact they aren't, but they are using Aristotle's name. And so this also leads to a discrediting of Aristotle as if it's some rigid philosophy, right? That can't change, or else it's all going to be ruined. And so Galileo, this point in history, even though Galileo is claiming that these people aren't even following the philosophy of Aristotle, even though Galileo is saying that, and Galileo is actually claiming credit, like, hey, I'm following Aristotle more than you guys. It doesn't matter. Aristotle, the philosophy of Aristotle and the philosophy of the other medieval philosophers like St. Thomas Aquinas are going to be replaced. They are going to be thrown out by the moderns. Okay, and we see this, they're discrediting happening in the case of Galileo, but also with Martin Luther.